I want to just tell you a little bit about my feeling about scripts and sort of my relationship with scripted language. I might have shared some of this in the last session as a way of an introduction, but there's a couple of different things that were sort of aha moments for me. And one of them had to do with years ago when my daughter Emily was in 7th grade. Her very, very best friend, Brianna, was moving to Vermont. And she and Brianna were like sisters. And her dad had passed away, unfortunately. Her mom had a job with a pharmaceutical company where she could telecommute, years and years ago. And they were moving to Vermont. So long story short, we wanted to create an experience, an opportunity for them to have a memory. And so my wife and I decided that we were going to take them to Broadway, and we were going to go take them and see the show Wicked. Has anybody seen the play Wicked on Broadway? It's cool, right? It's cool. And I have to tell you, I went to that show with a little bit of what is this going to be? It's just kind of a knockoff on The Wizard of Oz. And, here's what happens. I hadn't really thought about planning much to go and do this. And so at that time, Wicked wasn't as crazy as Hamilton. And by the way, if you haven't seen Hamilton on the Disney Channel yet, go get it. It is just amazing. It's not like it is in person. I've never seen it in person, but oh my God, it's phenomenal. But I went to go see Wicked with Emily and Brianna and my wife. And I got the last row. We spent God's awful money. I mean, it's like an arm and a leg and a kidney to get to see the show at that time on short notice. And I had the very last row in the top mezzanine. Like you could stand on my chair and probably touch the ceiling of the theater. That's how high up we were. And nonetheless, I went to this show and I came back and I came out of it and I was just like, oh my God. It was just one of these things where when you go to really great theater, or if you go to a really great musical performance, do you know how you're physically moved? It's just something that you're like, oh my God, it's amazing. And it's an experience that happens with professional actors that doesn't happen anywhere else. And I just remember coming out of the theater and saying to my wife, I don't know how these guys do this, how these actors and actors, how this cast does this. They do this show 6 times a week, twice on matinee days. And I get chills in the theater here with this. And for them, it's just like going to work. It's like at some point it becomes routine, don't you think? Like at some point, are they on the stage going through their lines and thinking to themselves, gee, I wonder if I forgot to take the chicken out of the freezer today. I hope I defrosted that. Meanwhile, they're giving off this performance that is just mind-blowing and it's captivating and it's physically, I'm having an emotional reaction to it. And I said to my wife, well, one thing's for sure, they certainly knew their lines, right? And years later, when I was the team leader in Montclair, the Montclair Keller Williams office had a number of, there's some really artistic folks that live in Montclair. A lot of them in my office at that time had been post-television people, meaning TV producers, television on-air personalities, news broadcasters, and things like that had left that world and got into real estate. But there was also actors and actresses. And I remember there was this one guy who was an actor, Broadway actor, and he had taken some time away now to be at home and raise his family. His wife actually was a big shot Wall Street exec, making a boatload of money. And so he had kind of stepped out of acting to be at home, be a stay-at-home dad. And he was really good. I mean, one of the shows that he acted in was actually nominated for a Tony. But I was talking to him and I asked him that question. And I said, how is it that you guys can do this and communicate at such a level that it just has such power and it just kind of moves me? And he says, that's the difference between a professional and kind of community theater. He says, you can go to a play in a community theater, you can go to a high school play, and they can kind of be saying the lines correctly, but it's not the same thing. You don't have the same reaction. He says, here's the difference. He says, we have to learn these parts. We have to learn these lines and these characters and the mannerisms so intently that I don't have to think about it anymore. And he said something that was really fascinating to me. He says, what the hardest job is if you're a Broadway actor? It's to be someone's understudy. Because sometimes you don't even know with just an hour's notice that you're going to have to step into that role that night. And it takes a bit of emotional gymnastics to kind of get that conjured up inside of you, that you know what the lines are going to be, and you know what the mannerisms and the personality is going to be, and you deliver it with conviction. He says we have to learn this so much, and it got us to a conversation about scripts. He said, I can't be on stage worried about the lines. I have to know what to say so intently that I can spend my energy focusing on the connecting, focusing on the relationship that I'm building with not only the other people on the stage, but that we're building with the audience. And I can't think about how to create that kind of an emotional engagement if I'm worried about the lines. And that's why the understudy is so hard, because I got to remember all these different lines. And, this big aha moment went on in my head. And I said, that's what this is about. The power of scripted language is that when we don't have to think about what we're going to say, we can focus more on the engagement. What happens is this. A lot of times we're having a conversation with a buyer or a seller, and we feel like we're into a groove. We feel like everything's going really well. And I feel like we're building connection, and I feel like rapport is happening. And then what happens is they throw an objection out there. And they say something like, Hal, everything that you said tonight sounds really good, but I'm not willing to pay your fee. And then suddenly what happens is we have inside of us, we have this oh shit moment, right? We're like, oh God, what am I going to do? I panic. Well, believe me, what happens in that moment is that the energy that was there in between us, that energy that's there in the room, that energy that the Broadway actor is so skillful at kind of presenting out to you, and you're feeling it. The moment that I have that moment of panic and my heart skips, I pull all my energy back. I pull it inward. And I start to get caught up in, oh my God, what am I going to do? And in that moment, the other person feels the energy disconnect. And they're like, I don't know what happened there. Sometimes you'll hear as trainers, sometimes you'll hear some of the trainers after they've said something that they know kind of challenged people or pushed people to maybe get outside of their comfort zone. A lot of times you'll hear trainers say, hey, what just happened here? The room just kind of got funky, right? That's what we're talking about, the energy shift. And why is this so important? Because the job of sales is to build relationship and influence. We're guiding people to allow them to be influenced by us, influenced to make decisions that are in their own best interest, to make them faster than they could make them without our engagement. And once they've made a decision, to proactively take action, which means that they have to be instilled with a sense of confidence and clarity and know what to do and know it's the right thing. And all of that stuff takes a relationship. And if we're floundering into conversation, if we have to think about, oh my God, I don't know what to say here, I don't know how I'm going to respond to that, then we're never going to build the level of rapport that it takes to become influential. And so one of the things that you just have to stay in curiosity about if you're not sure, and ultimately surrender to, is that people who master language are more influential than people who don't. It's true in every walk of life. It's true in politics, it's true in sales, it's true in everything. People who master language create more influence. And what we have to learn is, what is the language of our craft? The only tool that we have is, how do we communicate with people? And how do we master the craft of language, right? We know for fact, and research tells us, that communication is really only 7% is the words. 38% of communication is how those words are delivered, the rate of speech, the intonation, the cadence, the things that we accentuate, the volume. 55% of communication, over half, is what are we communicating through our body language? What are we communicating through this emotional bow wave, if you will? That was a phrase that was coined by a psychologist named Richard Boyatzis out of the University of Chicago years ago. And he talked about how we have this kind of emotional sense that precedes us. It's almost like, he calls it a bow wave. If you think about a boat cutting through the water, the front part of the boat is the bow. And as the bow is pushing through the water, it pushes this little wave out ahead of it. And all of us do that with our emotional state. What we're feeling inside, we project out, people feel it. And it's been quantified and it's been measured, and it's so clear that it happens when we're talking to people, that if we're anxious, they begin to pick up on that anxiety. If we're confident, they begin to pick up on that confidence. That doesn't just happen in person. It's even been quantified over the telephone, that one person is in California and one person is New York, and what they've determined through MRI imaging in terms of what parts of the brain are being activated by the conversation, that when the sender of that message is in a heightened emotional state, the receiver of that message over the phone 3,000 miles away has the same parts of their brain activated. This is just the way it is. And it's just something that we do this in Ignite in Module 3 because there's practically nothing more important than recognizing that the words that we use will have everything to do with the influence that we create. And so let's get into it. We talk about in this course that successful agents do certain things every day. They grow their business, and then they run their business, and growing their business is broken down into generating leads for buyers and sellers and making presentations to buyers and sellers, doing consultations and all that stuff, previewing real estate. I'm hoping that you're previewing real estate right now. In Ignite, we want you to be looking at 10 homes a day online at minimum and 10 a week in person. Just get out there and learn your inventory, right? And then they run their business. They do all the different things in terms of marketing and showing buyers houses and negotiating contracts and all these different things. Well, today, the language of scripts really impacts virtually everything that we do on the growth business. Everything that we do in lead generation is scripted. Everything that we do in our consultations and presentations is scripted. And even to some degree, when we're previewing real estate, and there's some scripts around that too. And in showing homes and negotiating contracts, all that stuff, the language that we use matters so incredibly that's why this is module number 3. So what's the purpose of scripts? Well, a couple things. You know, they help you lead generate, right? They help you in your lead generation efforts. If my lead generation is designed to get in the pathway of people that may need the services that I have, or get in the pathway of people who are willing to allow me to hang around, right? The great Tim Heil, who I've talked about in some other classes this week, if you've been in some of my other classes. Tim is really an amazing agent out of Keller Williams in Austin, Texas. He was one of the 30 under 30 top prospects in the real estate industry under the age of 30 years old. I believe he was 27 when he started to form his first expansion team. And he has teams that are based in Austin and Dallas and Houston and lots of different cities in Texas. And one of the things that Tim said is his business really exploded when he changed up his goal of his lead generation. He was really in his contacts and his marketing and his prospecting, he was always trying to find somebody who is ready, willing, and able to do business right now, which is always what we're looking to find if we can. And if they weren't, he just said, look, it's a numbers game. I'm just going to throw this fish back into the water. I'm going to keep going until I find people that are ready to do business now. And when he said, when I learned to change that up a little bit, because the likelihood is the average person only needs to buy and sell a home, unless they're an investor. It's an event that occurs in their life on average once every 9 or 10 years. What are the odds that today is the day when I'm calling you? You know, it's funny. I remember early on when I was managing for another brokerage in 2006, I was doing some lead gen calls with an agent who was fairly new to the business. And she was making her calls and everybody was hanging up on her and saying, no, I don't need you. No, I don't need you. And she got this one person and she had asked basically, you know, were they thinking about selling their house? And the guy said to her, you know, as a matter of fact, you know, my wife and I were actually having this conversation this weekend. And she looked at her phone and I watched her face and her eyes got real wide and she's looking at the phone and she's looking at me, she's looking at the phone, she's looking at me and she went, click, and she hung up. I'm like, no, don't do that. But she was so unprepared for somebody who actually said yes that she panicked, right? Scripts help guide the conversation. And what Tim Heil said was, when I determined that what I really, really, really wanted to do was to find people that I could have a conversation with, that I could create enough points of connection and add enough value that they would allow me to stay in touch with them over time. And if I did that, then I trusted that When the time came for them that they were ready to buy, sell, or invest or take a real estate action, that they would do it with me. But it changed his script, because what he was looking for from a motivational standpoint wasn't, are you ready to take the action? It's, would you allow me to stay in touch, right? The big picture scripts help you do all that stuff. They help you identify objections. They certainly help you close deals. The language of how we close. And remember, we close for time. When we close, closing is a step that we take at a very specific part of the transaction. It's when we're ready to meet, we close for the meeting. We frequently in the industry of sales, not just real estate sales, but sales in general, frequently we close too early. You hear always be closing, which is the mantra of the rookie salesperson. It was made popularized in the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, which was written to be a satire of what bad sales looks like. We don't close for an appointment immediately any more than we ask someone to marry us on the first date. That's crazy. What we do is we uncover their motivations. We guide them through scripted conversations to help determine when is the right time. And if it's not the right time to meet now, then we have other conversations with them to guide them to what would be the next step that makes sense. It's not time to meet yet, but what would you be willing to do that could move you through this process, right? And it's scripted conversations that help you do that. One of the things that scripts allow you to do is speak in terms, in ways that the customer understands. We think a lot about behavioral style, and we'll get to behavioral style more as we go through Ignite. But basically, human beings have 4 basic behavioral profiles that kind of flow from our personalities, that kind of flow from our temperaments. We think about, psychology, and people's personalities kind of evolve over time. But generally speaking, for most of us, somewhere in our 20s, usually our personalities kind of crystallize. You think about kids, those of you that are parents, your kids' temperaments can really change. They're very different at the age of 6 than they are at the age of 10. And at the age of 10, and they get into that sort of awkward, gawky part of their teens, and they can suddenly become more withdrawn and more shy. And as they kind of grow through that and they become a little bit more confident and they find a little bit more about who they are, they kind of become a different behavior. And somewhere in your 20s, for most of us, your personality kind of takes shape. And it doesn't change much throughout the rest of your life, barring trauma. Post-traumatic stress, there are certain things that can really change your underlying personality makeup. But out of your personality flows your behavior. And people who are more timid and more cautious are going to behave differently than people who are more assertive and more aggressive. That's just the nature of the beast. And when we understand what people's behavioral styles are, then we can communicate with them in language that's in sync, right? And so scripts help you to do that. The last thing that I think is so important, and it's what I talked about before, is knowing what to say just instills confidence. I like the show Shark Tank. Has anybody ever watched Shark Tank? Just put in the chat yes or no if you've ever seen the show Shark Tank. I think it's kind of fun to watch personally. But in Shark Tank, they have all these people who are venture capitalists, right? I see some Shark Tank fans there, right? And here's the thing, if you've ever really studied venture capitalism and had an opportunity, I don't get a chance to talk to these guys myself, but I read studies. And what the venture capitalists say is, when I'm looking for an opportunity to fund, here's what I'm looking for. I'm not just looking for the best idea. You have to have a good idea, because I'm not going to put my money behind a bad idea. But an idea alone isn't enough. What I'm looking for is who can pitch their idea with passion, who can pitch their idea with a sense of confidence and a sense of passion, a sense of drive, because what I know is to get from idea to implementation is going to take a lot of energy and a lot of work. And if I don't feel your passion for it, if I don't feel that emotional bow wave communicating to me that you got this, then I ain't giving you my money. It's just that easy. You could have the best idea, but if I don't think you can bring it to fruition, I'm not going to fund it. And it's that presence is what we call it. There's a great book called Presence, written by a psychologist by the name of Amy Cuddy. Cuddy is her last name. She is a former Rutgers professor, gone to Harvard now in the MBA program. And she really studies performance dynamics. And it's a great read, Presence. But that's what we're talking about, is when you have a sense of confidence. And a lot of what her research was about really was, here's sidebar here, but here's what Presence was in Amy's world. Harvard graduated a lot of folks in their MBA program, and what they thought and what they realized is if you graduate from Harvard with an MBA, you're really smart. And if you graduate with Harvard with an MBA, because you do that, you're going to get some really great job opportunities. And what they found was Harvard grads were not getting hired at a significantly higher rate than anybody else's grads, even though they were Harvard. And what they determined is the reason why that was happening, their assumption was there has to be something in the interview process that isn't connecting. And so what they began to look at is, how do we help train our grads to be able to interview better? And what they determined was, when people are in that zone, when they've got that confidence, when they've got that sense of, man, I'm on point. And we've all experienced that in our lives. And I don't know when was the last time that you did, but we all have experienced moments where we're like, I'm kind of feeling like I got this, man. I feel bulletproof. And there's certain things that happen in that state. Your body chemistry changes. Testosterone levels go up, cortisol levels go down. Lots of different things change in your body. And that's the presence state that the researchers were trying to determine, how do we coach people into this state so that when they get in the interview, they can present that sense of emotional bow wave that can cause them to get hired instead of rejected. And it comes down to confidence as one of the key elements, right? And knowing what to say in the moment, and knowing a process of how do you handle things when they go wrong. When someone gives you an objection or they throw out a condition, and those two are different, right? An objection is resistance that's based on fear. A condition is resistance based on circumstance. And a condition might be, I'm not ready to make an offer on this home because I've been furloughed and I don't have 2 pay stubs to show to the lender who's willing to approve me so that you can get a qualified, pre-qualified letter. That's a condition. It's something that can be solved and has to be solved, but it's not based in irrational fear. Objections are based in fear. And there's a model, a methodology for how do you deal with that. It starts with an acknowledgement so that you can begin to connect around, yeah, I can appreciate how you might feel that way. And then it goes right into an exploration of that fear. What is it that's going on that's got you so upset or got you so concerned? And let's make it in a real estate situation. You know what, Hal? I love everything you've talked to me about in terms of listing my home, and I think you're the guy. I just think that your 6% commission is too much. How would you handle that? There's a model, a scripted model. And the model begins with, hey, I can appreciate that. 6% is a lot of money. Acknowledgement. Letting people know that we're not going to fight with them. We're going to get on the same side of this energy here. And then it goes on to exploration. What is it about 6% that feels so excessive? And then we listen. We zip it up and we listen. And they tell us what it is that bothers them and what it is, and we can start to unpack the emotions of that, and we can start to work with that, and we can provide solutions and begin to work our way through this. But these are processes that are known and they're scripted. And they give you the sense of confidence that no matter what you say, I'm going to be ready for you. And what we know is that when it comes to real estate, there's only a handful of objections you're ever going to get anyway. There's objections around price. There's objections around your fee. There's objections around the perception of your experience level. There's objections around a lot of key things. And if we've got a couple of different strategies of what would I do if you did that, then you feel confident. Then you go into this interaction with the ability to not worry about something coming up, causing me to go, oh crap, what do I do now? And breaking that connection, causing that other person to feel the disconnect and say, I don't know what just happened, but something doesn't feel right anymore. And suddenly I'm not sure if I trust what's going on anymore. That all happens in that 55% of communication outside of our awareness, but it happens when we don't have confidence. So the big picture, I hope I've made my point clear. The big picture is it gives you the ability to do all this stuff. And we use scripts all the time. Think about sales. You go into the store Did you find everything that you were looking for? Go ahead, look around. Please know if I can help you. I see you admiring that big screen TV. Are you thinking about getting one for the big game this weekend? These are all scripts that are designed to engage and stimulate conversation and to build rapport that we use in sales all the time, right? All the time. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do is just, kind of remove your limiting beliefs, if you will. Try to, if you can, about scripts, because, I get it. We have this image that being scripted means inauthentic. What we have this image of scripted means awkward and uncomfortable. And the truth of the matter is, when scripts are internalized and known and practiced and practiced and practiced, then we have the ability to be that Tony Award-winning actor, because now I can focus on the connection, and I can focus on the relationship, and I can create an experience that's world-class for you in the process. So suspend your limiting beliefs, if you will, for a while. How do we use scripts, right? Here's a video. Oh, hold on for a second.
Hi, I'm Jeff Glover, and I'm going to tell you the top 5 things that you need to know about using scripts. Step 1, you're going to need to get your scripts from a top agent at the office, your team leader, a MAPS coach, or of course, Keller Williams University. Step 2, we're going to need to do a total transformation of, instead of talking and telling, of asking questions. Selling isn't telling, selling is asking a series of questions that leads to desired response. So instead of talking so much, we need to get in the habit of asking questions. And asking questions gives us control of the conversation. Control of the conversation gives us our ultimate outcome, which is an appointment set or closing. Step 3, we need to listen with good intentions. Well, what I mean by that is we need to listen to their answers instead of just listening to them talk and asking another question that comes to mind. For example, instead of asking a seller where they're moving to and then going on to the next question, how soon would you like to be there? Ask them, where are you moving to? And when they give you a response, ask them, what takes you there? Step 4 in becoming better at scripts is we need to learn to mimic, mirror, and match the prospect. What I mean by that is we have to listen to their tone of voice. We have to speed up or slow down based on how fast the prospect is talking. That means when they respond and say, we're moving to Toledo. Oh, Toledo, that's exciting. What takes you there? 93% of communication is body language and tonality. And that means only 7% are the words that we say or the questions that we ask. Step 5, we need to take these 5 points and practice them daily. If you think of NFL teams, they practice 50, 60 hours on the practice field for a 1-hour game. Our game is our presentations and our appointments, and we need to practice daily everything that we've learned every single day before we meet with our clients. When it comes to scripts, my biggest aha is that everybody has their own scripts. We're pre-programmed to have scripts, and we're talking and asking questions that are scripted. However, what we found is that most of our own scripts are no good. And so we have to learn the right scripts, the right questions to maintain control of the conversation. Thanks for watching KW Connect. Make it a great day.
All right, that's Jeff Glover, who is an agent, big mega agent. I actually forgot that video was embedded in this new slide deck. It used to be a video that I had to call up separately. But let's talk about that a little bit. I hope you heard that well. What kinds of things did you hear Jeff talk about? What came out of that for you guys when you saw him sort of talk about a lot of different things about scripts? Anything resonate with you? You can just go ahead and unmute if you want, or put it in chat.
Hi, Hal. This is Laura.
Hi, Laura.
What stood out to me was the don't talk, ask questions.
Yeah, you know, there's a phrase that says, when you're telling, you ain't selling. Questioning is the art of script, right? It's asking great questions. You know, what we learn is that people really only take action based on their own belief systems. They only take action when they've come to their own self-awareness that it's in their own best interest. And so really, really good scripts are scripts that guide that conversation so that people have their own aha moments. And based on that light bulb going off in their head, they take an action, right? So great catch that it is a selling skill is a questioning skill, right? For sure. Anything else that you heard Jeff talk about in terms of scripts? There's a lot of nuggets in there. I'm sure there was other things somebody paid attention to that got your attention.
All right, I'll throw this out, that practice, that how important it is to practice daily.
How important it is to practice daily. An NFL team practices 60 hours for an hour game. You know, I remember hearing one time an interview with Itzhak Perlman. That's who it was. It was the violinist Itzhak Perlman. And, you know, I think arguably we could say that one of the most talented musicians that's lived in our lifetimes. And he talked about how if he doesn't practice for one day, he knows it. He says if he doesn't practice for 2 days, the music critics will recognize it. And if he doesn't practice for 3 days in a row, he believes his audience will recognize a difference in his performance. Practicing every day is what it takes to be at the top of your game. And one of the things that happens sometimes is we don't practice enough. In fact, Ignite, this course, really, if we were not doing it on Zoom, what we would be doing is the Ignite commitment is actually, it's a 3-hour-a-day class, not a 1-hour-a-day class. It's one topic, but it's 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, there's this 1 hour of this content. And then there's 2 hours of really breaking into small group and practicing everything, every real estate related conversation, from buyer consultations to seller consultations, to going through the contract paperwork, to going through the listing paperwork, all that stuff we would be pairing off and practicing. And so what we will be doing going forward within the next week or so is starting to schedule different hourly sessions where we're going to actually do that too, right? I want to create a forum, and we'll do it in Zoom by logging into the Zoom room, and then I'll put you into breakout rooms where we actually assigned a group of 2 or 3 of you to be your own little sub Zoom room for a while. And I'll be able to jump into each one and sort of talk to you and see how things are going. But practice, man, practice every day. And we don't practice enough. We just don't practice enough. When you think about what it takes to be a Broadway actor, to be so well rehearsed that on an hour's notice, you can get into a character as an understudy and deliver a performance that's worthy of the high price ticket that people paid to see you, right? It's really important. You know, George says in the chat box, listening to the buyer and listening to the seller, and Carol talks about mimicking and practicing and mirroring and matching and all those different things, right? You know, what Jeff says is we all have our own scripts. It's just that our scripts generally aren't that good. and I think what happens is because we ad-lib. We kind of ad-lib too much. And here's the thing that I would say about scripts. There's certain things that have to be memorized and delivered in a very specific way because neurolinguistics matters. Neurolinguistics is the science of language and perception and how the words we use cause the brain to behave. And if we use the wrong words in the wrong way, we actually create problems for ourselves. A lot of what we say is embedded in conversations where not every word of the conversation has to be exact. You know, I think a lot of times what causes people to struggle with scripts is we read the script and I say this and then the other person says that and then I say this and the other person says that and we feel ready to go. And then we go out there in the real world and I say this and they say that. And you're like, dude, you're not following the script. Here, I should have given it to you before I came. Here's your copy, right? Well, what tends to happen is because people don't respond in the right way, we panic, right? And so we've got to practice again and again and again for every eventuality. And that's why we need to have role play partners, right? We need to recognize, though, that parts of the script are prescriptive and parts of the script are really just conversational. I think about the word script not just to mean the language of a play or a performance where I've gotten the script and I know what to say. I think about scripts also in terms of prescription medicine. And if I go to the doctor and I'm not feeling well and the doctor writes a script and I take it to the pharmacy and they fill the script, what I get is a bottle of capsules. And in that capsule, there is an active ingredient and there's an awful lot of inert ingredient. That's just kind of the transportation device that gets the active ingredient into my body at the speed and at the pace that it needs. And language is the same way, right? a lot of the prescriptive things that should be said in very specific ways can be contained in conversations that can kind of go in lots of different directions. When you understand scripts and you learn what's prescriptive and what's not, and there's a couple key themes here. You know, one of the themes is that the brain processes language in very specific ways, and the brain responds to what we call command language in a very different way. When I command you, I'm telling you to take action, right? And so when I command you to do something, the brain responds to that. Now I think about all the different kinds of commands, and how do I know if I'm using command language? Just imagine yourself seeing a drill sergeant, you know, in basic training with a Marine group, and he's barking out commands. You know, he's not saying things like, you know, would you be kind enough to give me 15 push-ups? No, he's saying, drop it, give me 15 push-ups. It's a command. It's a very specific action. Do this. And what we know is the brain responds differently to that. And as parents, we have lots of commands that we try to use with our family and our kids. Make your bed, do your homework. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. But however, the brain processes the language that way. And so what we know is that when we want people to take an action, we build that command into the conversation. And what action would I maybe want someone to take? Well, you know, maybe what I want to do is I want to have people list their home with me. Maybe what I want to have happen is for people to feel comfortable enough with me so that they're willing to list their home with me. And so we take that language and we build it into a sentence. And the sentence could sound something like this. You know, Bonnie, if you feel comfortable with the information that I share with you tonight, will you be prepared to list with me before the end of the evening? And in the communication sentence there were two commands that were built in, that were baked right into that sentence. And one of those is feel comfortable. Bonnie, if you feel comfortable, I want you to hear that command, feel comfortable, because the brain responds to commands. And in some of you have been to some other classes where I've used this example before, but if I was to say it to you in the next 15 seconds, do not, under any condition, do not, under penalty of death, do not think of a dog. You thought of a dog. And even though I begged you and I threatened you and I said, don't do it, when your brain heard think of a dog, for most, all of us, an image of a dog popped up just for a fleeting second, because that's what the brain does when it gets the command. And so you use those strategically in your language to influence people to be softened up to the ideas, right? And I love the language that says, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to say, because I want you to feel comfortable first, right? If you feel comfortable, would you be prepared to list with me before the end of the night? And did you notice how there was a little bit of a pause before I used the phrase feel comfortable, or before I used the phrase list with me? Bonnie, if you feel comfortable, I just took a little pause there. Why do I do that? Because the brain, the way the brain works is that it's a pattern monster. It's always looking for patterns. And because it takes so much energy, the brain's primary responsibility is to constantly be scanning the environment, determining what's safe, determining what's dangerous. Your brain's primary job is to keep you alive and not let you get into a situation where you could get hurt. And in order to streamline that decision-making, the brain looks for patterns, and when it recognizes a pattern that it sees as safe, it unplugs and it looks at something else. And what happens is when people begin talking, the brain tunes in and says, oh, that's just Hal talking, and it goes and it pays attention to something else in the environment. But if I put a little bit of a gap in my vocal pattern, if I put a little bit of a break, what happens is the listener says, hey, what just happened here? I got to tune back in and see what's going on here. Because most people don't talk and then put a pause in it. What's happening? And the moment it tunes back in again, what does it hear? It hears the command. That's what I want you to hear, because I know your brain's going to respond to it. Bonnie, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to share with you tonight, are you prepared to list with me before the end of the evening? And it takes practice. And it takes practice to kind of get that to come off naturally. One of the things we teach early on in Bold which is one of our Keller Williams great courses, is to put that gap in between the command. We actually encourage people to clap 3 times, right? And so as we're practicing, it sounds like this. Bonnie, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to say, and you're like, why would I practice that? And please, don't do that for real. Like, don't go into your listing presentation and start clapping. People will be like, what the hell is up with this guy? But what you do want to do is you want to practice that gap, and you want to make it subtle, because the way that we deliver those messages matter, right? And so we've got to learn the scripts. And what Jeff says is we have our own scripts. It's just that most of our scripts aren't scientifically written this way. We kind of free fall a lot. We kind of know the direction that the conversation is going to go in, and then we just kind of wing it. And a lot of times, if we're not careful, we build into the conversation things that hurt us. I'll give you an example. I like this example because it's so clear, at least to me. I hope it is to you. There's a right time to get on the market in a normal year where there's no pandemic. The spring market, generally speaking, when do most sellers, what month would you say most sellers would be eager to list their home if they're springtime sellers? Just put in chat or just answer the question if you would, and unmute yourself. And I'll turn off my phone that just rang. I owe KW Connect, KW Cares money.
March or April.
March or April, right? And Ariane, I know we've talked about this before. You've heard this before. March and April is when most sellers want to go on the market because they believe that a couple things are better. We're out of the dead of the winter. The buyers are coming out now because the weather's better. I don't really want to actually have to be under contract because I want to move over the summer when the kids are out of school. And so I'm going to wait till March or April to put my house on the market, believing that that's when they're going to get the best outcomes. And what we know consistently year after year after year, barring years where there's big February storms, is that if you get your house on the market in February, you're going to have more buyer demand than you will have later. And here's why. Because the buyers enter the market earlier than the sellers do. Once the winter holidays are over, once people are kind of through New Year's, the buyers start poking around and they get out there, and the buyers are out there, and there's not much inventory to look at. And once the Super Bowl is over, then the buyers are there full force. I always look at Super Bowl Sunday as kind of the beginning of the spring market. And if you've got good quality inventory on the market in February before everybody else, you're going to get the most motivated buyers looking only at what you have. And historically, the month of February is the month where the highest list to sale retention occurs in February, year after year after year, barring pandemics and storms. And so if you're smart, you have conversations to try to nudge sellers who want to list in April, to nudge them up into February. And so we know how that script goes, but I don't want to sound pushy and I don't want to sound bossy because nobody likes a pushy, bossy real estate agent. So I kind of know where the conversation goes. I'm just going to free form with it. And we have conversations that say something like this, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you keep your house off the market any longer, you're going to miss the best market of the season. And from a communication standpoint, that makes perfect sense. Conversationally, that makes perfect sense. What we're saying, we think, is don't keep your house off the market any longer, because if you really want to get the best results, this is the time to do it. And we think that we're encouraging them to do the right thing. And yet what the brain heard because of the science of command language was, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you keep your house off the market, there's command number one. Is that what we wanted to say? No. What we wanted to say is put your house on the market. But what we did say is if you keep your house off the market, because putting the negation in front of it doesn't change it. The same way I told you not to think of a dog and you thought of a dog, and what they heard is keep your house off the market. You're going to, here comes your second command, miss the best market of the year. Do we want them to miss the best market of the year? No, but because the language was phrased in a command, that's what the unconscious brain heard. And so now they're confused. And if you really want to screw them up, you'll say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you keep your house off the market any longer, you're going to miss the best market of the year, which is why you should list with me tonight. And while the words made sense in the unconscious is like, wait, hold up. You're saying keep the house off the market, list with me tonight, miss the best market. I don't know what the hell you want. And in that moment, what happens is the person is feeling uncomfortable. They don't know why. They can't put their finger on it because everything that you said seemed logical, but there's just something that's making me uneasy here. And you know that happens because now they give you these little code sentences like, you know what, we're just going to need to think about this. We're going to have to sleep on this, which is code for, I can't quite tell why I'm not feeling safe and comfortable enough to move forward with you, but I ain't doing it. It's because we jammed ourselves up, because we went free rogue and we just thought we were having a good conversation and the language tripped us up. What would be better? What would be better would be, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you really want to get the best outcomes and take advantage of the best market, you should really list your home tonight. All those things which are consistent with what we really want and don't cause any ambiguity. And I'm telling you, a lot of people are like, oh, come on, this is just mumbo jumbo. I'm telling you, as a former psychotherapist, this is how you influence people, either to the positive or to the negative. And too many times when we don't master our scripts, what we create is ambivalence. We create in our buyers and sellers the inability to move forward with us because what we say doesn't seem to match what they hear. And it creates problems. And so we've got to get good scripts. We've got to get good scripts and we've got to practice them. And we've got to recognize that we practice and we practice and we practice. And how do we learn scripts? I want to share with you one more video in the time that we've got here. This is not actually embedded. I have to get my screen to close enough. Hold on. There we go. This is actually on YouTube right now. So I'm going to go to YouTube. Anybody know the name Jim Parsons? Who's Jim Parsons? Anybody know this guy? Jim Parsons is the actor who played Dr. Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory. And one of the really cool things in this little short video is he talks a little bit about how he chooses to memorize his lines. And the thing that's important to know about Jim Parsons, he's an actor from Texas. And he's not a scientist. And yet the role that he plays requires him to use an entirely new vocabulary of scientific words that he has never been experienced before. And how is he going to learn how to do that so that he can communicate with so much, he's got it so embedded in who he is that he can create that character, that you can create that experience and that emotion. So let's just talk, listen here. I'm going to move my mic so you can hear Jim talk about how he learns scripts.
Okay. What's your process? This is a good question for Jim Parsons. What's your process for preparing for each episode? How do you memorize the special Sheldon monologues or complicated science terminology that you have to have?
During the week, I start, I probably have them on me. I do. I make my
magic note
flashcards. And like this is Act 1, Scene A. And then there's my first cue line. It's from Leonard. There's the L. It says, okay, see you later. And then on the back is my line. And I pace around my house and I do drill them like some sort of ballet dancer learning moves. Largely because I don't understand a lot of what I'm talking about. And so I need the muscle memory to be in my mouth, at least to be really ready to go, because if I do think about it, A, the right words will never occur to me, and B, the ones that do will just be wrong. I don't want to be joined to another object by an inclined plane wrapped helically around an axis.
In what way are you screwed?
What's your process?
We're gonna cut that video there, but I think you get a sense of what we're talking about here, right? It's just that, these are just words. You think about that, inclined plane helically around an axis, like that would never come to anybody in real time unless you've rehearsed it, unless you've practiced it, unless it was so natural that it flowed out of your mouth, right? A couple of things here. I just want to get a couple of responses. What kinds of things popped out in terms of what you heard Jim saying there? Anything strike you? Anybody?
You're muted.
The muscle.
The muscle memory, that he had to practice this so that it was kind of in his mouth. And so a couple of things that he does is he practices out loud. It's not just a reading thing. Because what happens is you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and read it, and you think you got it, and then you open up your mouth and you're like, blah, 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 blah. And that's what's going to happen.
He writes it on the flashcards too. Like David will have us write out the listing presentation.
Absolutely. Because even though someone gave him the words and said, here it is, what we know is that when you take it and you read it and then you write it for yourself, it's a deeper level of learning because you've taken it and you've put it into an action of writing and you're just bringing it in deeper. You're bringing it in deeper, right? I think best practice is, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here because I think we got this here. Best practice is read it, repeat it, and I'm going to insert, before you even read it, rewrite it. Read it in your own hand, not in the printed script. And I'm glad that David teaches that in Push, because that is really best practice. Now, I know for myself, my handwriting is so god-awful. It's become so bad over the years. I used to have good handwriting, and now in such a digital world, I type everything that I write, and as it comes off my pen, I look at it and I'm like, I know I will never read this again. I will never understand what that is. But take your time and write it and read it and repeat it, and then read the second sentence and read it and repeat it. And remember, you don't read the whole script from beginning to end any more than when you're practicing for a play that you run the entire play from beginning to end. You practice one scene at a time, and then you add the second scene, and then you put the third scene together. And so great script practice is getting a good script. And trust me, there's good scripts, there's better scripts, there's really great scripts, and there's some really lousy scripts still. I think that a lot of the sales scripts that a lot of agents lean on right now would be well deserving to be rewritten right now. I think we've got a lot of buyers and sellers who are much savvier than they were 20 and 30 years ago when some of these scripts were written. I think the language has to change because the way that people will allow themselves to be influenced has changed. People are not willing to respond the same way to some of these old scripts. But when you have good scripts and scripts that are really designed to get people to make the decisions and to move forward in the process, and we practice these by writing them out and reading them out loud and saying them out loud, and we drill it again and again and again. And then once we've got those words down, then we start to think about the things like the pacing and the mirroring and the matching, and we get the ability to be that Broadway actor. When I no longer have to think about the words, I can really focus on communicating. And if I can connect with you and create a level of connection that you feel safe with me, and if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to say, are you ready to listen with me tonight? When we get this down, we are going to just shorten the curve. We are going to create the capacity to be more influential more quickly with people who feel more confident. And it's so ironic because what we push back on scripts so much of the time is, I don't want to sound inauthentic. I don't want to sound robotic. And yet, when we learn it, when we integrate it, when we practice it, the truth is we have the ability to make our communication more authentic, because I'm actually now communicating with you on a much, much deeper level. And so we're going to wrap it here. It's 11:58, but I'm going to encourage you to practice the scripts. Now, we've given you script books. If you go to the toolkit in Ignite, there's a script book for the Spark session, which is all the scripts around this first phase of the business. How do you talk to people and let them know that you're in the business? How do you remind them that you're in the business? How do you let them know that you've changed companies, if that's what you've done? Lots and lots of good scripts there. There's also a script book for the second half of this class called Elementals, where there will be scripts for things like what to say with people at an open house and how to guide people through different marketing conversations and prospecting conversations. But I'm going to encourage you to practice your scripts, learn your scripts, practice your scripts. And what you're going to watch for is you're going to start seeing in the Zoom links that I'm going to start to schedule. I'll probably call them Ignite practice hours or Ignite practice sessions. And in those hours, we're going to come together as a group, and I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and we're going to just practice. We're going to practice the conversations so that we can do it and get the words out of our mouth confidently, and do it with a sense of confidence that we can create that kind of presence that is necessary for true, authentic communication to happen. So that said, we're going to call it a quit here. I'd love to get any ahas, any takeaways, anything that you heard today that resonated or causes you to think differently. I want one or two ahas before we wrap it up.